Former Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey made waves this weekend when he tweeted his support for Democratic presidential candidate Robert Kennedy Jr. On the platform yesterday, Dorsey tweeted a link to a Fox News interview in which Kennedy states that he can beat both President Biden and former President Trump with the comment, quote, "he can and will." Subsequently, when he was asked if Jack was endorsing Kennedy or just predicting that he would win, he replied both.
Current Twitter head Elon Musk will host Kennedy in a discussion space on Twitter titled Reclaiming Democracy today at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This comes just after Instagram reinstated Kennedy's personal account after previously permanently banning his profile in 2021 over, quote, debunked claims about the coronavirus or vaccines. Kennedy slammed the ban as profoundly undemocratic. Just a few days ago, the account for Kennedy's anti-vaccine organization, the Children's Health Defense, still remains permanently banned from the platform. This news rankled a lot of people. Obviously, Jack, a very high-profile, at least previously high-profile person as the CEO of Twitter, weighing in a somewhat unexpected way. Right, the whole narrative of Elon Musk's takeover of the Twitter files is largely that there was a kind of liberal establishment cabal running the enterprise. Jack was at the top of that, although he largely escaped some of the direct criticism from Elon Musk. And here he is coming out endorsing, yes, a Democratic candidate, but an anti-establishment Democratic candidate who's piqued the interest of a lot of conservatives and Trump voters. What do you think?
Which has kind of been, like, this is not a new shift for Jack, honestly. If you've been following his political musings over the year, he was a big fan of Tulsi Gabbard. Before she was, I think now she's very explicitly associated with the right, but at a time where she was, you know, an independent Democrat with some very left views, but some very different foreign policy views. He seemed to be very foreign policy motivated in general, very privacy. You know, he's a supporter of Edward Snowden and, you know, those kinds of causes and things. A real civil liberties left person, or the areas where the left and actually libertarians overlap in some degrees. So this actually doesn't surprise me that much. The hostility, I think, to independent thinkers, to conservatives, et cetera, that existed on Twitter, as far as we can tell, was not substantially due to policy making that Jack himself was doing. Now, one can say he should have been more involved, making sure it wasn't happening. It seems like he was kind of checked out, and he let the safety policies kind of run amok and affect free speech under Vijaya Gad, the trust and safety head. Again, still fair to criticize him for not, you know, for being asleep at the wheel. But it seems like if he'd had more involvement, maybe some of those things would be avoided, because he himself is kind of a free thinker it does not have views that just slot right into kind of normie mainstream Democratic land, as evidenced by this this endorsement, not just a prediction that RFK Jr. Would do well against both Biden and Trump. That's a prediction anyone could make without saying it's a good thing, but also an endorsement of the candidate himself.
And if you keep reading into the Twitter thread where he did make that endorsement, you get more insight to his feelings about the Democratic Party. Generally speaking, one user replied to Dorsey's tweet saying, not a chance the DNC allows RFK Jr. to be nominated. To this, he replied, even more reason to support the candidate. Someone else voiced the same concern, saying the DNC would never allow that. Are you kidding? Jack Dorsey says, true, but they being the Democratic Party, they seem more irrelevant by the day. I think that sentiment, like it or not, is an accurate description of what is going on. The energy politically is much stronger in the Republican Party. There's a perception of Republicans fighting for things, regardless if they're the right things, but fighting for things for their constituents. And the Democratic Party is very much in a defensive mode. They are doing victory laps about avoiding the debt ceiling crisis, where they basically had to give up stuff, agree to ending the student loan moratorium, give up some pretty significant things, even though they're not characterizing it that way, in a move that should have been a pro forma, just raising of something that is raised routinely under Republican presidents. They have reneged on any number of promises to their base. The only thing that saved them in midterms seems to have been the Dobbs decision. Donald Trump, recognizing that, isn't even running hard on abortion the way that some of these other more cultural conservatives are. And Democrats their lack of relevancy is really reflected in the unexpectedly significant appetite for a candidacy like RFK Jr.'s.
RFK Jr. is doing something pretty remarkable that it would be a good sign if he were to somehow somehow by defeating Joe Biden in the primaries, if he were to become a general election candidate, or if he were to, run third party or just run anyway. He is courting support and getting support from a diverse range of people. Obviously, he's running in the Democratic primary where he's polling at like 19 or 20 or something percent. That's a significant number of Democrats. He's also doing a lot of alternative and conservative media. He clearly has a lot of conservatives, Republicans, other former Trump supporters who like what he has to say about vaccines and some other subjects. He's courting some libertarian support. I see Libertarian Party people all over my Twitter feed who say they prefer him to all the potential candidates in the mix. And I think he's courting some left support on what he said about Ukraine and subjects like that and foreign policy. So that's a pretty impressive kind of resume he's building. Of course, it's drawing, thunderous condemnation from mainstream media people like Mehdi Hasan, who went after him recently. I think we have some of that to play.
Sadly, there's plenty wrong with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his long-shot presidential bid. Here's just 3 worrying things among many that you should know about him. First, Robert Kennedy Jr. is one of America's leading anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists. He and his Children's Health Defense Group have spent years amplifying discredited and dangerous nonsense linking vaccines to autism and death. And during the pandemic, he and his group became some of the biggest promoters of anti-COVID vaccine conspiracy theories, making a ton of money off of ridiculous claims that Bill Gates was using microchips to surveil and maybe even starve the American people, and also offensive analogies with the Holocaust.
Even in Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps into Switzerland. You can hide in an attic like Anne Frank did. I visited in 1962 East Germany with my father and met people who had climbed the wall and escaped. So it was possible. Many died doing it, but it was possible. Today, the mechanisms are being put in place that will make it so none of us can run and none of us can hide.
So Mehdi goes on to talk about the extent to which the Kennedy siblings are not supporting him, the anti-vax stuff. I mean, these are the messages that the mainstream liberal media have been repeating. They don't seem to have had much of an effect on Kennedy's poll numbers. Right. Quite to the contrary. I do think that there's a little bit of this pile-on that is illustrating to people exactly why he is the anti-establishment choice and giving energy to this campaign.
In those remarks that he made, so you should just not make Holocaust analogies in general. He did subsequently apologize for a kind of careless metaphor there, which he should have done. That's just something you should avoid rhetorically.
Of course.
Absolutely agree. He was talking, as you pointed out before we started playing the segment, he was talking about the vast surveillance state that is being put in place, the ability to track us via tech, the government's encroachment into our privacy, which are real and serious subjects that should not be dismissed. Yes, he should not have made that exact metaphor, but let's not get lost in the weeds here and say that it's crazy or conspiratorial to be concerned about how our governments might surveil us given the technology.
That's a really important point. And folks listening to Kennedy more closely than perhaps Mehdi Hasan hear that and then don't double down on their distrust of liberal media who aren't willing to engage in the substantive criticism, even if they are simultaneously pushing back against the choice to use the Holocaust to illustrate that point. It's also worth noting that today at 2, when he does the Twitter Spaces, he will be joined by Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, obviously, Michael Schellenberger, David Sachs, again, and a host of others. So it's interesting also to see who he continues to kind of associate himself with politically in a way that for liberals seems like a wink, wink, nod, nod, but maybe I'm not so liberal, but to independent thinkers, or independent voters reads as I'm actually interested in engaging more broadly than just in the establishment Democratic Party sphere. We're also going to have a segment coming up in a little bit that engages with some substantive criticism that RFK Jr. got over the weekend relating to some statements about Israel-Palestine, but we'll get to that later, and we'll have more Rising for you right after this.